Have you ever really stopped to think about how we figure out what's right and what's wrong? It just feels instinctual, right? But how much of that moral compass is actually shaped by the culture we grow up in? Well, today, we're going to dig into some really fascinating research that looks at that exact question, starting right from when we're kids.
Okay, so let's start with a pretty simple question. Is it always wrong to lie? I mean, your gut reaction is probably, yeah, of course. Honesty is the best policy and all that. But what if the situation gets a little murky?
For instance, what if telling a little white lie could actually help your whole class win a competition? Or maybe help your sports team clinch a victory? Does that change things? This is the exact kind of tricky spot that's at the heart of what we're talking about today.
So yeah, how do kids navigate that tough space between what's good for them and what's good for the group? And does their cultural background have anything to do with it? Well, a team of researchers wanted to find out.
This explainer is all based on a collaborative study from researchers at the University of British Columbia, Zhejiang Normal University, and the University of Toronto. They teamed up to really understand how culture might shape the way kids think about morality.
So, how in the world did they actually test this? Well, their setup was actually pretty simple and kind of brilliant.
First, they got together 214 children from a whole range of different backgrounds. And this part is really key. They worked with three very distinct groups: Han Chinese children living in China, Euro-Canadian kids, and then bicultural Chinese-Canadian kids. They also looked at three different age groups, 7, 9, and 11, because they wanted to see how these ideas might change as kids get older.
So here's what they did. Each kid was told a short, illustrated story about a character facing a tough choice. Like, imagine a girl who isn't a great speller but really wants to join the spelling bee to get better. Does she lie to get in? That helps her, but it could hurt her class's chances of winning. After the story, the kids had to rate the character's action, and then, and this is the most important part, they had to explain why they thought it was good or bad.
Okay, so what did they find out? Well, the results showed this really interesting pattern that, honestly, boils down to a classic conflict: me versus we.
It seems two main ways of thinking popped up. One was an individual focus, thinking about things like personal growth, being honest, and your own rights. The other was a group focus, which was all about keeping the group happy, winning as a team, and feeling a responsibility to others.
And you could really see the differences in the data. For example, take a story where a character tells the truth to help himself, even though it hurts his team, like a star basketball player who admits he's injured and sits out the big game. The Euro-Canadian kids rated that action way more positively than the children in China did.
So what about the Chinese-Canadian kids? This is so cool. They didn't just fall somewhere in the middle. The researchers found they acted like a cultural bridge, basically switching their reasoning depending on the situation. It suggests they've learned how to use different cultural rulebooks depending on the context. Just remarkable.
But really, the most powerful stuff came from the why. It wasn't just about whether an action was good or bad. It was the logic, the reasoning the kids gave for their answers. That's where the gold was. For instance, going back to that girl who lied to get into the spelling bee, one 9-year-old Euro-Canadian kid said it was good because it was a chance to improve her spelling skills. You can see the focus there as all about self-improvement. But then, in a different story, where a character lies to help his team, an 11-year-old said it was okay because he didn't want to let his class down. That's a clear example of group-focused thinking. So the point is, these kids were using totally different but equally valid moral frameworks to figure things out.
So, this is all super interesting, but what does it mean for us, as parents, teachers, or just people trying to get along in a really diverse world?
Well, the biggest takeaway is that culture really, truly does shape our moral logic. It sort of teaches us what to value most. This research helps us understand that a kid who justifies a little lie to help their team isn't being bad. They're just working from a different playbook, a group-focused one. And getting that, well, that's a huge life skill for all of us.
And I think that leaves us with one last thing to chew on. Knowing that our friends, our coworkers, our neighbors might have a totally different moral compass, how can we get better at listening to their reasoning? And, building those bridges of understanding.
Thank you for listening to the Integrity Lab podcast. This podcast initiative is coming to you from researchers at the Child Studies Labs from the University of Toronto and University of British Columbia.